Welcome to the Flower Essence Podcast, and join us on an exploration of the healing wisdom of flowers.
With combined decades of experience in the study and practice of flower essence therapy, I, Kathleen Aspens, and co-host Rokana Feld guide you to reconnect to nature with these potent vibrational remedies. Hi, I'm Kathleen Aspens, and I'm here with Rokana Feld. Today, we're going to be talking about confidence. There are many aspects of confidence, and we have a long list of essences and aspects about how to build your confidence, how to build up that concern that you might have about being seen or heard. There's lots of different aspects to it. What is the first part that you'd like to start with, Ro?
Yeah, well, I like to think about what's beneath self-confidence. You know, what really is that? I think of confidence itself as trusting your abilities and judgment in order to do something, to achieve a task or perform. And then what makes that happen? Why is that? Why don't you have that is what I like to look at. And the self-esteem aspect of it is what I look at. And then how is self-esteem fed? Is it, self-esteem, the definition of that is more of a belief in yourself and your own self-worth and abilities. And then what feeds that self-worth? Is it a love for yourself, and a healthy respect for yourself? Or is it being built up by ego? And so there's slight variations to all this terminology, but when I work with a client, I like to dig back farther into what's the root cause of a confidence issue, and if that
Absolutely,
if that person has self-esteem, what kind of self-esteem do they have? What's feeding it? And if it's ego, then that, or if it's like somebody's, if they're basing their self-esteem on their job or how much money they make or what kind of car they drive and not something deeper and believing in themselves, then that's where things start falling apart.
Yeah, totally. And I like that your approach, mine too, is to sort of look underneath what it is, because you're afraid of something or you're not feeling confident. Okay, well, let's sort of unpack that a little bit and find out what's resting underneath. Sometimes there's a negative voice that one's hearing. Maybe it's a voice of a parent or a voice of a teacher that tells you can't do something or you're not good enough. Those sorts of voices, it's really worthwhile to start getting in and getting some essences that will help counteract those voices, because there's no amount of sort of will forces that will push you into doing something successfully if you've got those voices going on in the background all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Quieting that inner critic.
Yeah. And there's just so many different aspects of that. It can be coming from a bunch of different places. But I think that what you were talking about is really interesting about where your will to live is coming from, that sense of confidence and taking exciting action and doing things. I think that when we worry a lot about that notion of ego is something that I dance with a lot, because I think that the ego has been kind of unfairly demonized. Now, there are certainly, egomaniacs, and that's not great, but our ego is kind of part of how we interact with the world, right? If we don't have any ego at all, we're just sort of like a little lump, and we can do great meditation maybe on our cushion, but let's go do something in the world. And I think that building up that sense of mission and drive and energy is a big part of helping build confidence.
Yeah, I have an interesting story about that, actually. When I was thinking back about, my career and my life, I was a .com developer in the 90s. I was designing websites, and it was a highly competitive environment. And I really, as a woman this was in the 90s, in that tech world that was dominated by men, I had to really develop my ego. to have any place at the table, whatsoever, to
Yeah.
get that job. This was in San Francisco, so it was highly competitive. Um, and I did it. I got there. I was doing that job. I was highly successful. I was married to my first husband, and he was a part owner. We were a part owner in a nightclub. Um, all these things were happening, and then my husband died. The nightclub failed,
Oh no.
and the dot bomb happened.
Oh wow.
So the tech industry crumbled in the in that at that time, the first dot bomb, I guess, and I got laid off. So within about
Wow.
a year, and there was a sort of a slow burn on my confidence. And then by the time that year was over, it had just totally crashed. And then tech jobs were very hard to get, and I was unemployed for some time. And my confidence was so low in myself and what I could do in trying to get work. At one point, I was called for doing some consulting by a former employer who asked me to if I could do a shopping cart for them, and it was I didn't I was surprised. I didn't think I could, I didn't think that I could do it. I was surprised they were even asking me. Whereas a couple of years before that, I would have been either I would have been completely confident that I could do it, or I would have been able to fake it until I, made it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I and it took me a while, but I recalibrated and sort of regained my bearing. But when I look back at that, and think about that Maslow's hierarchy of needs with
Mhm.
safety and love, it is all part of that base of the pyramid. Before you get esteem, all of that was just taken away from me. And because my confidence was built on a foundation of only that ego, and not a true self-love and self-worth for myself, when that went away, I was, the rug was pulled out from me, and I was left, in a crisis with nothing. So I do agree that ego is so important and needed in certain ways. But if there's nothing holding that up, that speaks to me believing in myself, regardless of my job or who I'm with, or, what my success level is, then that's what I like to focus on, is making sure to get in there to that layer of support, and feed that self-worth from a way that you can put the ego on top of it, but the ego can't replace it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see the ego as being, something of a guiding light and something that helps you overcome obstacles, rather than that's the foundation of everything you do. I mean, the shattering experience that you endured, and that's how I would characterize it. I mean, literally, it's you're rebuilding from rubble.
Yeah.
Everything is just poof, completely gone. That's kind of an echinacea experience.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
flower essence echinacea is really helpful for kind of reconstellating the star of you after those sorts of really shattering experiences. And I think that as you obviously know from enduring that sort of situation, if some client is coming to you and telling you that they have this and what essence is for that, it's like, this is going to be a process. There's going to be some
Exactly.
time involved, and a lot of inner work, in order to start to kind of put yourself back together again after all that. And you're not going to get right back to where you were instantaneously. It's going to take some time to kind of rebuild that foundation.
Yeah, it's such a process. And of course, I didn't have flower essences at the time.
Yeah. Well,
That
we
would have
we get
helped.
to where we need to when we need to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's quite an experience. I think that one of the other essences that I'd be kind of thinking of, for that sort of situation, would be sunflower.
Yeah.
Sunflower is such a beautiful essence to kind of help build up those ego and soul forces so that you can follow the light, that guiding light of your life. If you think about the action of what a sunflower does, it's heliotropic, so it follows the sun across the sky. And so it has that healthy ego because it stands up tall and it sets its flower way up at the top, but it's following that light. It's following that higher light of being rather than some sort of a false light of ego.
Yeah, and I love those heliocentric flowers. They're so special.
Yeah, and I think that when we're dealing with confidence, we are dealing with a lot of the golden color, a lot of those sorts of types of flowers that express that pattern. What are some of the essences that you like to use?
Yeah, there's definitely love the sunflower. I also like the gold gem elixir, not
Oh, yeah.
as a part of the whatever the combination that I'd be formulating. That seems really key in an essence like this. What you were talking about with the sun and the gold and yellow color, and then the gem elixir of gold
Yeah.
with just that low self-esteem and that any weak sense of personal identity, kind of just wrapping some warmth around that and building that as part of maybe that base again. Um,
Yeah. And do
yeah,
you use the one from Alaska?
I do.
I use that all the time and just love it for kind of giving you that reconnection to your sense of preciousness, like your own like value of who you are and that what you are is really worthwhile. And to connect that to the sunflower is a great combination.
Yeah, I do. I love the Alaskan gem elixirs and gold specifically. Yeah.
And the gem elixirs are interesting too. What Steve Johnson always said was that concept about, the flowers catalyze changes and shifts in consciousness, and the gems help to anchor them into the body, help anchor them into the physical. So I too use gems and flowers quite a bit in combination so that we make sure that we can make that shift, but that we can also hold the shift and stabilize that shift.
I love that.
Yeah, pretty
What
interesting.
else? What else do you use with your confidence formulas?
Well, I think that if we were looking at larch, Dr. Bach's essence of larch is always really, really useful. Larch has that quality of, turning I can't into I can. It really helps to kind of build up that sense of self and the sense of willingness to take a risk and try something a little different. Even if you feel a little clunky at the time, you can kind of get your way through and it's okay to fall a little bit. It's okay to stumble a little bit. It's okay to be awkward too. And larch really gives you that oomph. I make an essence from a golden larch. It's a different
Ooh,
species, and it has a little more of the quality of what we were talking about earlier, where it's about connecting that sense of who you are and why you came here to that action in the world. So it's that
wow! I'd
third
love to try
chakra,
that one.
higher essence connecting together and helping you bring that out into the world.
That sounds lovely.
It
You
really
know,
is.
there's one that's more of a research essence for me that fits in this part of when you need the confidence to do something, to accomplish a task, or to perform. There's a part uh, that you have to just be present and sort of ground yourself to go forward and get out of your head, get into your body and be present. And interestingly, I've found that cat's ear. Are
Oh,
you familiar with that one?
I am not.
Yeah, it's a hypocharis. I think that's how you say it,
Hmm.
radicata, and it's the false dandelion. So you've seen it a
Oh, okay.
million times, but it looks like dandelion, but it's not quite the same.
Uh-huh.
It
Interesting.
it has a long, multi-pronged center flowering stem versus
Mm-hmm.
the dandelion has the single hollow stem in the middle of the rosette.
Mm-hmm.
But cat's ear, it grows on all the lawns, the fields. It really is quite everywhere, and it grows with dandelion. So most people think that it's dandelion. It's got the same exact yellow flowers, and it
Uh-huh.
also has the puffball when the
Yes.
flower starts
I
to go
think
to
I know
seed.
the plant you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
interesting.
So completely overlooked, and and
Mhm.
it's everywhere, and it's pretty neat because and it grows out. It's a low growing, low spreading plant. It just kind of spreads out, and it has this quality of being. I call it be here now is the the little nickname that I have for it. But it helps us to hold our intention
Hmm.
and increase our energy field. It's all connected in the field. It grows in the field. It's all over the fields, and it creates a warm sunlit energy field.
Hmm.
So it's teaching us to kind of be still and shine our light.
Yeah.
It reminds us that all we have to do is show up and be present,
Yeah.
and that's success. And so I like to sometimes add that or work with that or something like that with a formula like this to make sure that that's included
Mm-hmm.
if warranted with the remedy.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, and since it's so visually similar and mistaken for dandelion, maybe that's a time to talk. We can talk about dandelion too, because I think dandelion is a good part of this type of a formula to help build confidence.
Absolutely.
For me, I see the angle is coming from the Chinese medicine point of view of the liver and the spirit of the liver, the hun. So the liver is it's an organ system that's involved in your sense of being and your sense of acting into the world, and it has a piece of that projecting and forcefulness and strength of action in the world. And so when it gets a little awkward, we might be a little too aggressive about things. But the perfect expression of our liver is of really connecting to our sense of self, our sense of being, and engaging in the world in an active way. And I think dandelion is really useful because it has those qualities well known for being a liver remedy from Western herbalism. And so it also speaks to that overlap of, nothing is new and under the sun, and we all recognize from whatever perspective we're coming from of the different coherences and commonalities. And so I think liver is actually useful in these sorts of liver spirit dysfunctions slightly that can help align your sense of self and sense of soul with your actions in the world.
I totally agree. And it's so interesting that you have that Chinese medicine perspective because I've found the same thing just from a different angle. And I love dandelion for its strength. I think of it as sort of an archetype of sort of a warrior,
Mm.
um, very Leo like energy. And it just, I, I think we talked about this before, but you can't kill it with Roundup. People try.
Please
People
don't.
try to
Please don't.
eradicate it from their lawns and it keeps coming back. It's so strong, and yet it also deals with uh, intention and wish making, blowing on the puffball to make a wish. And so it's not just a dreamy wish, it's really kind of like setting in motion an intention and then following through with it is how I see that
I
energy.
love it. And that concept of that you're sending with your breath that wish into the air, and then it's going to take that and carry that all the way to the next crack in the sidewalk
Yeah,
and
yeah,
send down a root and grow. Gosh darn it,
love
grow.
it.
Oh, what a
Love it so much.
great notion. How beautiful.
Another one that I like to use, especially with young women who don't have a lot of confidence, is rosemary.
Mm.
And uh, rosemary to me is so much about personal power, but rosemary is also for mental function and remembrance. Rosemary for remembrance,
Right.
but I see it as in this context is remembering your power,
Oh.
and whether that remembrance is coming from a past life or your DNA or whatever it is. At one point, women were more powerful
Mhm.
and and
Culturally.
culturally
Mhm.
latching on to that remembrance. Um, Rosemary has all of this traditional lore, where rosemary flourishes, a woman rules, or if there's rosemary in front of the door, that means the woman rules the house. There's all sorts of superstitious,
Oh,
interesting traditional lore about it, which I think is really neat when put into this context, that there's this sense of personal power, and it's not just for women, but a feeling of uh, the feminine the feminine of the soul, and having and just stepping into what's already there, kind of reconnecting with that. And it's interesting because I've had a few young women clients, early, like teenagers, younger 20s, and who have sort of a quiet and timid personality, and that's the first one I go to, just
mm,
as a woman. Just don't be afraid to uh, have to be there. Don't be afraid to be yourself, and to just take up space, basically.
yeah.
And that rosemary energy is so strong with that power, to me, that it seems to work really well for that.
That's so interesting. I'm gonna have to keep that in mind. I've never used it in that way, so it's really exciting to hear another option for it. I like what you're saying about that taking up space. I think that there's so much oppression of women, in a patriarchal society, and we're just not allowed to be who we are. This kind of fits back in a little bit with this notion of the spirit of the liver, the hun, because that's your expression on this plane. And if you're not able to really express yourself, you end up spending so much time, so much energy sort of smushing yourself down into the shape that fits the culture, or smushing yourself into the shape that fits your workplace or your home or whatever. And that's an awful lot of energy that you're having to kind of constantly prune back yourself and really not be you. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's one of the essences that I use for that aspect is the Gigantea rose, which is a really beautiful species rose that has a very large golden flower.
Mm.
And the flower just has this quality that just inspires self-radiance. It inspires you to be absolutely and fully you. And that all of the distortions and the aspects about the culture that tells you you can't be this or you're being too much that, it really just kind of wipes that away and kind of gives you a direct connection to the full force of you. And so whenever we're afraid of being seen, we're going to start doing little distortions and trying to fit in or try to kind of be what they're expecting us to be. And the Gigantea rose just really helps you connect to that full force of your being, so that there's not any of those weird habits that we put on to try to make ourselves more acceptable to somebody else, and it just doesn't feel like us. And so now we're performing, and I think that that's always, sort of damaging to the soul.
Absolutely. What color is that rose, out of curiosity?
It's this incredible golden chalice,
Oh,
and it
wow.
fades out into like a pale apricot color. It's just it's a simple it's a wild rose. It has just the 5 petals, but it's just wide open and really gorgeous.
That's really neat. I was also thinking about California wild rose
Mm,
to boost the self-worth factor, as part of that, valuing yourself, loving yourself, reminding us that we're good at, we can be good at something. I love California wild rose, and that it just, honoring your heart, and um, believing in yourself, and just having that self-love is, part of that foundation. And I use it in a lot of formulas.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I like that element of kind of growing and nourishing your confidence and growing and nourishing your self-love, and because it is usually a process, and it's not something that you can kind of flip a switch on and all of a sudden you're going to be 100% confident all the time. But the goal is to try to help our clients kind of take that next step. what's that exact next step? What is that thing that kind of scares you to do, and kind of help build you up so that you can take that step. And then there's going to be another step and maybe another little moment of, oh my gosh, I can't do this. But you can keep going and keep building on your successes.
Yeah. And being kind to yourself through that process. So that's another
Oh,
way
yes.
that the roses all help.
Absolutely.
Forgiving
Absolutely.
yourself, when you're not doing where you are, you think you should be.
Yeah, and that, like you say, that self-kindness element, I mean, it's like none of us are perfect, and that's fine. And I mean, how weird that we want to be perfect all the time. There's nothing that's perfect in the whole world. Everything is always a process. It's always in growth. It's always changing. So that notion of I can't do this until it's perfect, let's see what we can do to moderate that, and get that voice that tells you that you're not good enough because you're not perfect. Let's see if we can kind of quiet that voice down a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jasmine's another one that helps with, I think, self acceptance
Hmm.
and just honoring that sort of divine spark within
Hmm.
oneself. So
Hmm.
I like that one, especially if there's a negative self image, involved.
Hmm. What jasmine do you use?
Actually, I've been using one that I got from one of my early teachers, Catherine Abbey Rich,
Hmm.
from her line of gathering forces, I think. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that particular essence. I'm just curious as to what species it is,
Oh,
or
yeah.
such. I don't know. I've made a yellow jasmine, and right now I'd have to look up the botanical name because it's not loaded up in my brain. And I found that to be really helpful for pacing.
Mm.
For that aspect of now it's time to go to do, and now it's time to rest. And I think that maybe that's the kind of the next step once you start to build confidence is that you need to learn how to listen to your inner pace, because if you didn't have confidence, your pace, the inner guidance was always stop, don't do this, this is dangerous. And then when you learn to kind of walk past that, paper tiger of this is dangerous into starting to work, then you have to figure out, okay, what sort of a natural rhythm can I start to create with this work that I'm doing so that I know I'm not doing too much and pushing past a natural state of, okay, now it's time to rest and to sort of integrate what I've done, and then time to go again. That's what I find the yellow jasmine
That's
useful.
really interesting. Yeah, I believe this is a white jasmine, Jasminum officinalis, I think. I've made a pink jasmine and found that it had some similar divine sort of resonant, divine self in the resonance, but it wasn't quite the same.
I'm remembering correctly. I had a moment to think about it. It's Jasminum humula, and that's one of the jasminums. And then there are also other plants that are commonly called jasmines that belong to other genuses. One of the things that I think is kind of interesting now that we're talking about this is that the jasminum is in the Oleaceae, in the olive family.
Mhm.
And so there's a certain quality there that if you think about Dr. Bach's olive, that quality of restoration and deep nourishment,
Yeah.
that carries across into the familial connection of the jasmines. So I use olive a lot for that kind of that burnout, that just completely fried, exhausted, and maybe we're looping around to where we started with after
Yeah.
that shattering experience. You really need that kind of ancestral nourishment and rebuilding and connecting to your roots that the olive can offer.
Right. And borage too
Oh,
for that, and borage for the courage that's needed, especially after the deep crisis times, but just even needing confidence at any time. I like to look at borage. It's been known for that since traditional times, giving
and it's
confidence.
so gentle. It's such a sweetie.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
use it oftentimes it's just sort of like a little boost and a toner to a formula, because it's kind of acceptable for the whole family. It's not a challenging essence that kind of pushes buttons. It just sort of gently lifts you up. It kind of gives you a little cradling and, come on, you can do this. Let's give it a try.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so unique. I love the star flowers, the blue, how it has sort of a connection to our, our starry stardust roots.
Mm. But
So
also it brings it down, that image of the flower that always is pointing down to the ground. So it's bringing that starry light, bringing it down into reality, into this 3D
into the
world.
earth. Yeah,
Yeah. So,
absolutely. With the in the family of comfrey,
mhm.
boraginae, is that it?
Boraginaceae.
Boraginaceae, thank you.
There goes my horticulture
when I'm
background coming
when I'm
back.
not looking at the word, and I'm trying to remember it, it's just not going to happen sometimes.
Botanical Latin is definitely an acquired mouth feel. You have to learn how to wrap your mouth around that and just
Yeah,
run with it.
yeah.
So yeah, cool. And do you have any other aspects about why what you do for someone who's kind of afraid to be seen?
Yeah. With I've also got um, an essence that I made from the Ichium flower, also called Pride of Madeira. It's still sort of a research essence for me, but I find that it's helpful for just creative expression in front of a crowd specifically. So
Mhm.
um, I this plant is on the coast of California, although it's not native, and it grows up very tall with these long spires of beautiful blue purple flowers that bees just absolutely adore. They go
Yeah.
nuts for the flower, and these long spires of these purple flowers, and they get quite tall and big, and I just see that as sort of a, like an opera diva on stage or something when I look at
Oh
it.
yeah, I can see that from
Yeah.
reviewing the plant that's
Like
standing
with a
there, and you notice it. You do not.
yeah, you notice it. I mean, if you drive down coastal California Highway 1, you're going to see it and you're going to notice it, and it's
Yes.
going to take you're going to be looking at the ocean and all the beautiful scenery, but when you see that plant, you're going to take notice.
Not to be missed.
Right. And so yeah, I see that it's like she's in a big purple, flowing robe or something. It just
Mhm.
has this presence.
Yeah.
So I do like to work with the Pride of Madeira. I mean, just look at the name,
Yeah.
Pride,
Yeah, for sure.
for kind of that confidence in being out there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really lovely. Hmm. What a beautiful thing. And it's just such a beautiful plant. You just can't get over it when you get to spend time with it. It's just
Yeah.
it like you say, it's a bit of a diva, it's like, look at me, here I am.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
she's very she'll just grow from a root that you throw on the field. She'll just from that.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, almost invasive from what I hear, but um, just beautiful.
Yeah. Well, one of the essences that I think about and go to a lot when it's that fear of being seen, I just love Jane Bell's Naked.
Oh yeah,
And you just say it naked, and you're like, whoa.
that's right. Mhm.
Naked comes in both drops that you can take, with your formula or instead of a formula, and it also comes in a beautiful spray. And I think that is when I really reach for. I was talking to a client recently who is sort of stepping out into in from a supportive role into a front of the room role, and it's really scary when you're starting to switch, all of a sudden now everyone is looking at me. Wow, that can be a little daunting. And so the naked spray was really helpful to help her before she'd go out on stage or before she'd go in front of a group. Is just, I'd have her mist herself, and it really helps you get grounded and in yourself and just connect to that sense of fun, of being in the body, of we're doing this thing, and everyone look at this. This is pretty beautiful.
I love that imagery. That's great.
It's a very sassy essence. It's really just like, you just let everybody see you and they're just going to be so impressed by how great you are.
Yeah, and I love those sprays. The scent of that one, Naked, is, you know what? Isn't it jasmine in it?
There's definitely jasmine in it.
Yeah. So there
That's
we go.
interesting. Once again, it comes up. Yeah. Yeah. And the jasmine in it, it really creates that energetic of like in the body and enjoying it. I think that a lot of times when we don't have confidence, we kind of retreat to a cerebral place and try to sort of vanish like air. And something like the jasmine helps you get in your body and really be present. Like, yeah, we're doing this physically right now. Look at us.
Right. I love it.
Interesting.
Love that.
Yeah. So do you have any final thoughts that you might want to throw in on this piece? Or we've covered a lot of ground here on this
Covered a
confidence
lot of
topic.
ground, and there's even, there's more that we could add, but I mean, I think those are all so wonderful. And, I like thinking about it in terms of, what would go in a formula and what reason would you put one in versus another. And I think we touched on that a little bit, but I'd love to, do that more as we go forward.
Yeah, that's what really excites me about these conversations together is that we could talk about, the real nuts and bolts of flower essence therapy and how we're able to help people much more than, this essence for this and this essence for that, which is great, but it's a good starting point. Really the wonderful, intriguing beauty of flower essences is how they work together, how they work to match whatever the soul needs, whatever the individual needs, and then help them grow into that next step. And then we evolve from there. What's the next step after that? Well, let's see next month.
Absolutely. And what I love so much about working with clients is that every situation is absolutely unique.
Yeah.
Every person is unique, and they come to the table with their own set of history and constitution and things that they're dealing with. And every formula, it makes me think of, pushes me to create formulas I would have never thought of making, on my own. It's really cool, really interesting what that in a way co-creates with the client.
Yeah, agreed. And it is because it is organic. It's not that somebody's at stage 1.3. They're where they are and what's going on in their life and what kind of support do they need immediately and what capacity do they have to evolve or shift or change at that moment in time. Because that's how we're working at this very moment, this very space. What are you ready for? And it might be different last month than it is next month. And so we help support them with these really tailored formulas for exactly where they are. I like to bring in a seasonal element as well because there's different times and seasons based on Chinese medicine. We're focusing on different organ systems. We're focusing on different energetics. And so, the middle of winter is not time to be like, I'm going to be, starting all this new stuff and I'm going to be reaching out. It's like, no, this really isn't the right energetic for that. We need to wait until spring or even maybe a little later in the year.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Just to timing with the seasons is smart with everything.
Yeah. Well, beautiful.
Yeah,
This has been a
absolutely.
lovely conversation. I've really enjoyed it. And we'll be back next time with an exciting new topic on flower essences.
Yeah,
Talk to you
sounds
soon.
great. So great to talk to you again.
Take good care.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Flower Essence Podcast with Urkana Feld and Kathleen Aspens, and we appreciate your interest in connecting with nature on a deeper level. You can find us online at thefloweressencepodcast.com or join us on Facebook and continue the discussion.
This podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only. We are not physicians and do not diagnose, prescribe, or treat medical conditions. please consult with your own physician or healthcare practitioner regarding the suggestions and recommendations made by the hosts and guests of the Flower Essence podcast.